Hello everybody, welcome to the patch 13.9 rundown for amateur play. My name is Quintic. Today I'll be using my system of predictive criteria to help me assess the probable impact of this patch on amateur play. Now remember, as usual, the expected impact of most of these changes is very little, even if we observe a win rate difference in solo queue. We're mainly talking about whether your pick conditions need to change, whether your pools need to change, and remember, amateur players should be running with small pools, especially in Platinum and below, right? So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. This is going to be a very, very small patch. We're very likely not going to see a lot of huge impact outside of like maybe the Neeko midscope. But yeah, I'm gonna try to speedrun it. We're not gonna be here long. All right, so yeah, let's start with the champion update that, to my knowledge, is most likely to have actual impact on coordinated play, right? Which is the Neeko midscope. Now, I'm not going to go in depth on everything here because, again, I just released the Neeko midscope video. We were trying a offshoot of the day one format, and I think it went pretty well. The TLDR of this is that Neeko's damage is lower in the late game, but she's not got as much of a restrictive niche. Her mid-game transition isn't as extreme. She doesn't go immediately from aggressive lane bully to defensive bait and punish champion with no in-between. She's more of a playmaker with the ultimate changes with the expanded passive. The role that benefits the most from the expanded passive is support. All off-meta Neeko builds still exist if that's what you enjoyed, and Neeko jungle is now a legitimate pick. I genuinely think the clear is great, the skirmishing is great, 2v2 ganks, objective DPS, like, the only concern is, like, playing against hyper invade sort of picks like that, but that's not an unusual weakness for an actual jungler to have. Is she going to be top tier in any role? Doubtful. The number one thing, people are going to try to pick Neeko in your amateur games. They're going to try to deceive you primarily with the transform into a minion and run down the lane trick. You will have to start counting minions. If she ends up in your games, treat her like a stealth champion, where, like if a Twitch is on the enemy team, if an Evelynn is on the team, you and your team have to spend a lot more attention, like coordinating. You kind of have to slow down. She will have a warp factor. So just be ready to learn how to play around that, right? Yeah, if you're a jungler and you really love mage junglers and you want to experiment with adding her to your pool, by all means. If you're a support player and you think this type of champion would be useful because you are an aggressive early game mage with some playmaking potential and some great defensive, your AD carry as well, by all means, like, add Neeko to your pool. We're just gonna have to go through a learning process here. I'm not gonna tell you whether you should play her or should not play her. My expectation is good, viable champion. But, like, at the end of the day, mid lane Neeko in particular is still Neeko. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be dramatically stronger in at least that role. Aatrox. Yeah, we haven't seen Aatrox in a while, and it makes sense. He's definitely not the best user of Cleaver. The systems don't support him very well, and he'd received a ton of direct nerfs before they changed the systems. So, I mean, personally, I really don't think he's that bad in amateur. I really don't. If you're just extremely comfortable in Aatrox, there are builds that made him work. People were going Cleaver IVG anyway. The Eclipse build still did work, right? It was just harder to execute on and higher risk. So we're getting some movement speed back on World Ender, which, remember, that was one of the big, most impactful changes from Aatrox that made it harder for him to teamfight and kind of shifted him back towards more of an aggro champion. So, yeah, we don't have, like, many good predictors on movement speed in particular, but just remembering historically what this did to him. Even 10% at rank 1, too. Like, that is compelling for Aatrox's strength. And then bonus physical damage now scales up to 12% of target's max health. Hang on a minute. That is an exact rollback of most of 13.1. All of the R, every R change was reverted, and then the late passive changes, it's not at 5% at level 1 like it used to be, but it does now go back up to 12. On 13.1, this was the type of nerf where we saw, okay, nerf to multiple different aspects of a champion, unrelated, all power impacted. It does mean those all, like, combine to push him down in the tier list. Like, that at that time, I expected that he was just no longer meta-defining, but that skilled Aatrox players will still find success. I then added a note later to say, like, yes, Aatrox returned to his previous identity of, like, peaking around 15 to 25 minutes. So if we are looking at a partial rollback of the nerf that, by our notes and our measures, contributed the most to removing him from the meta, ignoring, of course, the systemic itemization changes that Aatrox did not thoroughly enjoy. This is really compelling for his consistency and reliability. Movement speed on a champion that's very dependent on spacing properly is super, super good. So what does that mean for us? Well, I now have a deeper understanding of like champ pool cycling for competitive play. I now realize that competitive players should have like their small pools, but everything that they used to play is always kind of simmering under there, and you can so easily like reintroduce that. And if you're banned out too heavily, you can take one of those old picks. I just got absolutely destroyed in the series last night because I'm too new to the role that I'm playing right now and don't have a pool that I used to play underneath, and it mattered a lot in draft. So with that understanding, with the understanding that a lot of top laners like used to play Aatrox and he's ready to be reintroduced to their pools if they wanted to, I would imagine that he looks like a more compelling pick as long as you can find itemization that like really works out for him. I wouldn't be surprised if you could find like an Eclipse Cleaver Sterix-ish sort of core. Because even though Aatrox is not the optimal Cleaver user, the item is just so strong. Yeah, I would predict that he is a more compelling pick. I would struggle to view him as meta-defining, but if you thoroughly enjoy Aatrox and really miss playing him, by all means, you can reintroduce him to your pool. Amumu, the flat magic damage per second is now being flattened across all ranks, so we're getting the rank 3 value immediately, and the percent max health damage per second is going up to 2%. Now, this was a nerf that they hit him with at some point, right? Yeah, this is just completely rolling back some changes to Amumu, so I suppose they felt that they over-nerfed him when they nerfed him and Demonic Embrace at the same time. Okay, so Amumu's getting immediately quite a lot more flat damage per second, like for clear speed, for that impacts clear health, which is not a factor that matters at Platinum and below, but matters much higher, right? He's getting the level... Yeah, he's getting the level 10 value of this spell at level 1 now, which is a significant increase to his overall damage, right? Getting a revert of a nerf that was applied because he was dominant and meta. So we would usually look at this and say, aha, DPS change. But it's not a DPS change to a DPS champ. I'm trying to figure out how to work with these numbers, right? Look, this is not within our threshold of a percent max health DPS change that we consider like super, super meaningful. But now that I'm looking at this, right, this mattered a lot for Amumu previously. The demonic nerfs ended up... I don't think they mattered as much as the clear speed cap nerfs mattered. I'm beginning to think one of my predictors might be a little bit off, right? Because my predictor says, cool, this is just nice, but historical Amumu changes have said these matter a lot. Like, so this contributed to Amumu being viable in top-level competitive, which is usually not the case. I think we can kind of resolve this, though, by saying this is actually just kind of absurd to have in terms of clear speed, which does impact clear health, and clear health is conventionally one of Amumu's greatest weaknesses. And so I will go out on a limb and say I need to review my predictors a little bit and try to refine them a little bit with the case of Amumu. And I would expect him, on a hunch, to actually be marginally stronger. And I apologize, but I don't know how to assess whether he needs to come back into our pool as well. We'll have to get some practical testing and see if he just feels broken again. Bel'Veth is getting a monster damage modification onto her Q, increased by 20%, which, remember, over the course of... that's pretty much times 4 over the course of one camp, because she gets 4 casts of these, and in exchange she's losing 0.2 AD growth. Now, this is the kind of number where we'd look at that and say, haha, like, DPS change on a DPS champion, it's so negligible. This should meaningfully impact clear speed a lot. I didn't actually know that Bel'Veth had a very unhealthy clear. The last time I seriously checked in with Bel'Veth was, like, on release when I actually discovered the lifesteal build before LS did, which, like, was a really huge ego boost, right? But then I got lazy with, like, keeping track of her. I've been interested in playing her lately. So I was not aware that her clear was like super unhealthy at the moment, and if it is, like, you know, clear health can matter in platinum and below, but usually that's not a very big factor. Clear health matters a lot in like diamond masters, like levels higher than that, where people are actually starting to learn how to punish those. So, you know, I'd imagine that even though this will do so much for her clear power and probably introduce like an extra option or two, ultimately that doesn't create new pick conditions for Bel'Veth in lower levels of play, just given what we understand about it. And if you already play Bel'Veth, you'll keep playing Bel'Veth. If you don't play Bel'Veth, this won't make you start playing Bel'Veth. So she's going to be, like, most likely decently stronger in theoretical levels of play. But for us in amateur, we don't really care. Jinx. Again, when we see its AD growth stat like this, we don't really care too much. DPS change to a DPS champion doesn't change pick conditions, doesn't change like overall performance, impacts win rate in solo queue, and impacts the number at the end of the game. But like, you know, we're allowed to kind of use that cop out over and over and over again because it keeps proving to be true, you know? Oh, I forgot they were actually giving Kayle, like, a major set of changes. Wow, okay. So the on-hit AP ratio of E is being decreased. That matters. The passive wave damage is now scaling based on champion level rather than your points in E. Okay, So you can't just hit level 11 and immediately have 35 wave damage. You're going to have 20. That's actually kind of a... Well, it's because the rest of what she's getting is... Oh, yeah, that is an increase in 150 to the range on R until level 16, in which case it's 250. Or the radius, rather. The radius! Do you realize how big that circle's gonna be? Cast time going down to 0.5 seconds so she can start auto-attacking sooner. Kayle no longer lowers her range when casting ult on herself. I didn't even know that was a thing. Invincibility duration is being standardized at 2.5. The time delay until the sword falls is now increased, so it's going to be a little bit longer. You have more chance to get away from it. The magic damage is going down at high levels. The ratio is going down a little bit. That's a lot of changes. Okay, so let's think about this, right? I think at a certain point, we have to stop being lazy by saying DPS change to DPS champion Kek W, because, like, you know, we have specific numbers that matter for burst champions, and those are our thresholds, and they're usually pretty solid. But maybe we need to start getting some thresholds here, right? Because we're losing now 15 damage per auto attack, as well as a very, very meaningful ratio on an on, you know, because small amounts of on-hit damage changing matters a lot. Like that's usually a very good metric. When someone's on-hit goes up by like 3 or something, you actually have to look at it and say, oh, wait, that does matter for some reason, you know, because it's just applied so frequently over and over and over again throughout a fight. Maybe not 3, maybe 3 is too low a number, but like, you know, Yuumi giving an on-hit of 10 is actually quite a lot of damage. Well, first of all, obviously, Kayle attacking while invincible is a big boost of power. Kayle having a larger area of effect radius to just dump her spell onto somebody else and still being useful. You know, in terms of combo power, this is outstanding, right? Invincibility duration being slightly higher early is actually quite a big deal. This is a much, much, much better utility spell. It's actually an absurd amount of utility increase. AD Kayle I didn't really like at all. In my testing, AD Kayle did the exact same DPS as AP Kayle, except AP Kayle's spells were just better. Now maybe we can talk about there being a bit more of a trade-off, especially since, you know, this AP ratio is down, this AP ratio is down. This iteration of Kayle will be so much more threatening when she actually gets to endgame. And so I see that, and then I start to think, well, am I overthinking the impact of these changes? Like, because what's going to happen is at 11, she's not quite as strong in terms of DPS. But maybe that just doesn't matter. Ultimately, this is not harming her at levels 1 through 6. No, but it is. But it is, because Starfire's Spellblade on hit is always active. Now, it does mean actually right at level 6 she can keep attacking during her ultimate, so that also impacts her power early. So I like Kayle as a really unique carry who just provides giga utility to her team as well. Right? Like, that's part of why she's unstoppable in the late game. Extreme damage, extreme utility. Team fighting into that is basically like playing into a hyper carry who is also an enchanter. And now it's even worse because, that hyper carry who is also an enchanter doesn't have to choose whether she wants to be a hyper carry or an enchanter when she presses R. I'm really struggling to, I really think I'm overthinking all of this early game because, it is slightly weaker in terms of raw on-hit DPS, but can that truly matter when she's more capable of trading back on her level 6 spike? Can that really matter when, she ends up with excessive damage anyway? And in fact, when in endgame, this is more damage. I don't really like looking at endgame Kayle and saying, wow, her endgame damage got buffed, because, getting there is always the struggle, but given the predictors that I have, where the most compelling DPS change is, literally just small amounts of on-hits matter, and given how tremendous this is, I have to say Kayle is a more compelling pick, and most likely that's going to be in the mid lane, where it's easier for her to skirmish around her jungler, and easy for her to actually make use of her utility early into the game. But, also in top lane, because just being able to trade back more effectively on your 6 spike is kind of nuts. This champion is quite a lot more compelling, and if the game slows down even further on next patch, as it might if some of those minion changes go through, then we'll have to reassess this again. Kayle is more compelling. If you like to play her, test her out. Don't immediately just throw her back into your pool, because, I'm confident that she's a better champion, but I'm not confident how much better she is. At least in our levels of play down here in, low-level amateur, where scaling doesn't get punished nearly as much as it could. Especially in, IBS scaling doesn't get punished. Platinum kind of can get punished. But, you find a good angle to cheat her out, and then you have Kayle on your team, So, okay, Sion's passive is decaying a little bit faster. I don't think this is what's making Sion super strong, right? Sure, he's a bit of a nuisance when he's on Heartsteel builds and stuff, but remember, the buff that actually brought Sion to the forefront was relieving his mana issues and just making him a lot more capable of laning. And so he's still very capable of laning, and he's still just a really solid tank to have. He doesn't always die. Ultimately, I'm pretty sure this mostly impacts the solo queue builds that have a Heartsteel and a Hullbreaker in, the same build. And, good. Get that out. But ultimately, I don't think this will change any of the reasons we're picking Sion, really. It's one of those changes you can easily adapt to, so, Swain is getting 5 damage per Q, plus 2% AP. Although that's initial damage, and then the bonus damage per bolt is going up by 3 per rank, at all ranks, plus 2% AP. So the maximum magic damage is going up, by about, 17 here. Yeah, 17-ish, 220-ish, plus a 10% AP ratio increase if you hit absolutely everything. And now with all the context of our previous changes, I'm really starting to second guess my DPS criteria, but I'm going to just stick to my guns right now, and we can have a longer conversation about it right now. You know what I'm going to say. DPS buff to a DPS champion. We don't significantly change our pick conditions at all. Taliyah's R, whenever Taliyah takes or deals damage, is now just whenever Taliyah takes damage. So actually, this makes Taliyah more capable of chasing you in combat with her Weaver's Wall, if you're not able to hit her back right away. So I think it's small quality of life, but it is power impacting to a certain degree, right? My opinion on Taliyah, I mean, I'm hearing thoughts that some people think Taliyah is actually quite bad, so it's actually possible that I haven't updated my knowledge in a while. But the last time I had a major opinion on Taliyah, it was that she wasn't broken, but she was quite good. She was stable. She could learn how to play into virtually any matchup. She's just kind of nice to have on your team in mid lane, at least, right? So, I mean, nothing here that's going to push Taliyah into OP status. Nothing here that's going to kind of make you add her to your pool or re-add her to your pool, or especially not drop her from your pool because it's a buff. But it's a nice, small power impacting quality of life change, I think. Trundle. Now, this is actually pretty tremendous. So, Trundle disappeared off the face of the planet. Why did he disappear off the face of the planet? Because he's a giant stat stick, and they hit all of his stats. They hit his W cooldown, and that was one of his most important spells. They hit his base attack speed, and that was huge. On the same patch, they hit his subjugate damage. And, like, let's just put it this way. If you go look up Trundle matchup stats right now, he is a losing matchup into Sejuani. That shouldn't happen. You know? Like, he has a statistically negative matchup into the champion who loses hardest into him. So look, Frozen Domain's already gotten some of its cooldown back on 13.3, right? Here's the initial nerf. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So where is Trundle relative to like his Season 12 peak? He's really only lost this subjugate damage. Like this base attack speed matters so much for jungle clear speed, which, you know, again, I need to emphasize over, the clear speed in our level of play, at lower level amateur, does not matter and does not change pick conditions. However, this also impacts his just raw champion DPS, and so technically this base attack speed change is, it impacts multiple factors of the champion, and so it is power impacting, right? I think Trundle's back. Trundle had like a 0% pick rate pretty much, but actually did manage to climb back up to 50% win rate through the like play of the diehards. So apparently he hasn't been as awful as I thought he was. So now we just need to question, like, you know, does the meta favor him? Trundle historically has not been a champion you just slam in every circumstance, but at the same time, you know, he's good not only into tanks but also any immobile champion, and he's just on paper the ideal bruiser in front to back archetypes. So, you know, while you shouldn't technically slam him 24/7 every meta, he's actually also just a perfect tool to have for certain team play styles. So if he would appear to be noticeably stronger, then by all means reintroduce him to your pool. And even though I'm a tank player and don't really like seeing him all the time, I do welcome Trundle being a more viable option again, because he was a staple last season. Okay, Volibear. Yep, I don't like him. He's pretty bad, I think. So what is he getting? He is getting an increase to his physical damage by 1% bonus health, and he is getting an increase to his heal based on missing health. It's like plus 1%, plus 3% at high ranks. It's not really helping him snowball to a ridiculous degree. I'd imagine not. I think we do get to say DPS change to a DPS champion, especially since it's the health ratio and the health isn't what you build first. So it's actually supposed to be kind of a scaling increase to a degree. Either way, I don't really expect that to be major for Volibear. And the only systemic change we have is Lich Bane, which is gaining 10 AP. And again, usually systemic changes are the greatest driving forces to amateur pool shakeups and playstyle changes. But this is Lich Bane receiving 10 AP. Is that going to make it compete with pen options on burst mages? No. Is that going to make it more compelling for DPS champions? No. Like they've already got Cosmic, which is much better now. They've already got Deathcap, right? So the Lich Bane candidates in the game are Echo, Twisted Fate, Victor, Fizz, Akali, Evelynn, Kassadin, Elise, Seraphine, Zoe, Bard, and Ezreal. Most of those candidates do not actually opt into Lich Bane. Only Echo, Fizz, and Twisted Fate sometimes, right? And even Echo, not even every game. So, is 10 AP going to make this compete better against raw penetration? My money is on no. But I suppose, like, you know, Seraphine, no, because Cosmic's in the game in current state. Zoe, no, Shadowflame, right? I suppose we can check it out on Evelynn. I suppose we can check it out on Kassadin. Like, but I'm not expecting very much. So, you know, for such a small patch, there are more power-impacting changes than I expected. Not all of them are applicable to us in, like, Platinum level, Gold level, IVS level, even Diamond level sometimes amateur play. But yeah, Kayle is power impacting. Trundle is like actually noteworthy. Amumu is worth watching. Aatrox is worth watching. Neeko is a dramatically different champion who is like much better in multiple roles. And so yeah, actually, even though it's a small patch, with ultimately a lot of tiny negligible changes, and although most of the changes in here will increase power levels only a small degree, like we could actually decide to make some pool adjustments off this patch. Now a lot of leagues are winding down and we are approaching like playoffs, or we're already deep into playoffs right now. And we do have an absolute monster of a patch coming up. So even though we do have some changes here, maybe it's not worth your attention or your efforts to actually shift things around too much on this patch. Maybe it's worth waiting for 13-10, seeing how the game settles, and then making our cycle decisions with a lot more information, right? We can make a more informed decision. So yeah, so that's how I think the patch is going to play out. That's how I think you should probably approach this patch as an amateur player. And I look forward to seeing you guys on 13-10 when we're going to have a lot of systemic stuff to talk about. And you guys know I love talking about systemic stuff.